In this episode and also in the next episode, we are going to take a look on how to display sprite sheet animations. So at the end of this episode, what we are going to have is this sprite sheet animation, so this running girl. Okay, so first let's take a look on the sprite sheet what we are going to load. So this is in the assets folder and images folder and this girl.png. So this has 6 frames, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frame, and each of this frame, this subframe, is 256 by 256 pixels, so 256 width and 256 height in pixels. So as you can see, its size is 1536 by 256. So if you divide 1536 by 6 frames, you will get that the width of an individual frame is 256. Okay, let's go back here to the template I already prepared here. And the first thing I'm just going to do is create, of course, a sprite list. So if you want to display a sprite, you will always need a sprite list. The next thing I'm just going to do is load the girl sprite sheet. So I'm just going to call it girl sheet and using the arcade.load sprite sheet function and giving it the path to the girl.png. So assets, images and girl.png. You can also use, as I showed you in the last episode, resource handlers. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to load it like this. And the next thing what we have to do is extract the texture grid. And for this, we have another function we can use. And I'm going to call it texture list and using the girl sheet that get texture grid. And the size is the size of the subimage, so 256 width and 256 in height. And we have 6 columns, so 6 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And also count 6, so 6 frames. And the next thing what we are going to do is just create a separate class which will inherit from the arcade.sprite class. And this is needed because we want to override the update function of the sprite class. So here on line 7, I'm just going to create a class called player and this will inherit from the arcade.sprite. And we also need to create the init method. And when we are going to instantiate a player object, the init will need to take as its first parameter a texture list, which is a list of arcade textures. And we should also override the superclasses or the arcade sprites init method. So super.init, and we are going to pass the texture list at index 0. And now let's override the arcade sprite update method. So I'm just going to open the source code by middle clicking here. And as you can see, the arcade sprite inherits from basic sprites and also from Pymang mixin. Let me search in the source code for the update method. And here on line 346 you will find the update method. And this is the default update method for a sprite and can be overridden by a subclass. So that's what we are going to do. And this method moves the sprite based on its velocity and angle change. Okay, so now let's go back here and just override this update method. So this takes the delta time, which is 1/60, so 16 milliseconds, and also some arguments and keyword arguments, and this returns none. And also, I'm just going to do is, we have this current texture index in the arcade.sprite class. I'm just going to open it again and search for CUR and texture. Here is the current texture index, and as you can see, it is an integer and by default it is set to 0. And we are going to manipulate this texture index, this current texture index, here in the update method. So I'm just going to ask if the current index is less than the self.textures. Of course, we have to create this self.textures here in the onInit method. So self.textures equals texture list. So the texture list will be passed to the init method when we instantiate the player object. And in the update, if the current texture index is less than the self.textures and we have 6 textures, 6 frames, Then what we are going to do is set the texture to the current texture index. So self.set texture, and this set texture comes also from the arcade sprite class, and we are going to set the texture to current texture index. So it will be first at 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then again 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have to also increment the texture index or the current texture index. So self.current texture index plus equals 1. And I'm also going to ask here after this if condition. So if self.current texture index equals 5, so we have 6 images starting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and start over 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if the current texture index equals 5, we are just going to reset it to 0. So self.current texture index will be equal to 0 again. And now let's create an object from this player class. So I'm just going to call it player, self.player, and using the player class and giving it the texture list we loaded here on line 30. And if I hover over with my mouse on this get texture, you will see that it returns a list of textures. Okay, now we created the player, also set its position. So self.player position will be equal to 640 and 360 xy. And also append this sprite to the sprite list. So self.sprite list.append self.player. And this should already work. I'm just going to draw it in the onDraw method. So we are going to draw the sprite list. And for now, what we are going to have is just one image. So the first image, which is this subframe. In order to loop through on the frames, we have to also override the onUpdate method. And here in the onUpdate method, we are just going to call the self.spritelist.update. And the sprite list, when you call the sprite list.update, it will automatically call all the attached sprites update methods. We have attached, or we have appended to the sprite list only one sprite, which is the player. And if we call this method, it will also call this update method. So let me see it, although it will be played back pretty fast. So as you can see, so to slow it down, we are just going to do one more if check here in the player class. And for that, I'm going to create one more property, which will be the time elapsed, and this will be set to 0. And also here, after every update call, I'm just going to increase the time elapsed by the delta time. So time elapsed plus equals the delta time. So in each frame, it will add to the time elapsed 0.016. And also, if the time elapsed will be greater than 0.1, I'm just going to indent this second if inside this. So if the time elapsed is greater than 0.1, then we are going to check this and set the texture to current texture index. And also reset the time elapsed to 0. And this should already make it a little bit slower. Let me check it. And as you can see, now it runs slower. Of course, you can play with this value, with this 0.1. If you want to play it back a little bit faster, you can set it, for example, to 0.05. And now it runs a little bit faster. Or you can just make it a bigger value, like, I don't know, 0.5. And now it will run much slower. I think the first value, which was 0.1, is the best looking.